You are looking at video taken secretly of American-made weapons arriving in Yemen. That is even as U.S. lawmakers ask for an urgent briefing from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, demanding answers on how the weapons got there. But despite the outrage of lawmakers in Washington, CNN has proof that it is still happening. Let's bring in our CNN senior international correspondent, Nema El-Bier, with more. Just explain what you've got here and its significance, if you will.
Well, what you see in that footage, Becky, is heavy weaponry arriving, reinforcements arriving to the Saudi-led coalition in Aden, in the south of Yemen. And the reason this has been particularly contentious is because of previous CNN reporting that showed that U.S. weaponry illegally had been diverted by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to their allies in the region. The only reason what you see there is not illegal is because President Trump and the White House have placed themselves solely in the middle of this debate, and they have President Trump has brought about several vetoes to continue arming what he says are key allies, the UAE and Saudi Arabia.
It's been a horrible morning here in Albania. People have been screaming and they've been hurt. We've had buildings collapse, and now we've got rescue teams going to the sites and trying to pull people out from wreckages. It's an incredible sight to see. Whole buildings have come down. Half of them are still standing, and half of them is still, on the ground. And you can see people's rooms as an exposition as to what their lives were before this earthquake. We know of this 6.4 magnitude earthquake. It happened at around, it was just before 4 o'clock in the morning. So it was before dawn, and it was dark. And then everybody kind of ran out of their buildings. The epicenter has been by the Adriatic in the city of Durrës. That's about 20 miles from the capital of Tirana to the west. And we know of at least 300 people who have shown up at area hospitals. There's a lot of rescue teams going all over the place. Another place that was hard hit was the town of Suman. This is 30 miles north of Tirana. And there were at least 20 families that are suspected to be under the collapsed buildings in Suman. So it's been, a tough morning here in Albania. People are scared. Schools have been called off for the center of the country, the areas that are most affected. So it's been very tough.
Sam, first on this breaking news from the Washington Post, what's your take on this?
Well, Anna, this is a case study in how the process isn't supposed to work, and it really signals that President Trump doesn't really care how illegal or dangerous his actions may be. Before President Obama took decisions when I was at the White House, two key groups of people were involved: the lawyers and security experts. What we're learning from this reporting is that the lawyers were not part of any discussion about whether freezing this aid was actually legal. And we know from previous reporting that security experts also weren't in the loop. So President Trump relied on something else, some intuition or some other group of people in order to make this decision. Second, the Washington Post reporting indicates that there was not a consensus among the lawyers that President Trump's move, again, this is after the fact, was actually legal. That really throws cold water on the GOP's defense that there was nothing wrong with what the president did.
There's also another big development this week, and the lawyer for an indicted associate of Rudy Giuliani told CNN that his client is now willing to tell Congress that Republican Congressman Devin Nunes was meeting with a former Ukrainian prosecutor. To be clear, Nunes has emphatically denied this reporting, calling it demonstrably false. But how significant could this be?
Well, this reporting is a Pandora's box of problems. Devin Nunes is a ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee. Its jurisdiction is oversight of the intelligence community. His work is not supposed to include using his official perch to do domestic political errands for the president or to look into investigations into the president's political rivals. We have the Department of Justice for actual law enforcement matters. Plus, this also raises even more questions about Nunes's competence to sit on this committee. Intel 101, consider your source. Getting information from Viktor Shokin, the former prosecutor general of Ukraine, really should be taken with a grain of salt. He has a strong bias against Vice President Biden, as does Rudy Giuliani, who reportedly Devin Nunes also got information from. And I think we could expect to see Devin Nunes get a subpoena as part of this impeachment inquiry. He could be called as a fact witness. He's met with several of the characters, according to this reporting, that are key to the impeachment inquiry, like Victor Shokin and Giuliani. And on it, he is very close to the president. So there are real questions about whether the president was aware of Nunes's extracurricular activities or in some way directed or condoned them.
And let me move on to something else, because while we've been so caught up in the impeachment inquiry, other things are happening. The president's been talking about, for example, the trade deal with China. Are we close to a deal?
Well, President Trump says we're very close, but this feels like deja vu, and very expensive deja vu, because the president has said this before. And while he's been involved in these trade negotiations, he's really put other policy issues with China on ice because he doesn't want to upset the Chinese. What we're talking about right now is what the president has called a phase one deal. The original negotiations were on a much broader set of issues. President Trump currently appears focused on getting the Chinese to commit to purchasing more U.S. agricultural products. The Chinese, for their part, want the United States to remove tariffs on Chinese goods. And President Trump has a deadline coming up. On December 15th, he's set to impose more tariffs on China. And if he does so, that will certainly throw negotiations off. While all of that is happening, Anna, we have massive protests in Hong Kong. And President Trump has stayed relatively silent because he does not want to upset the Chinese. At the same time, the Chinese are, according to U.S. National Security Advisor O'Brien, interning Muslim minorities in concentration camps, yet another issue that Trump hasn't spoken out about. So while these trade negotiations may slip past the end of the year, other policy priorities are being seriously downgraded.
Quick follow on Hong Kong. What is the impact of Trump's decision on whether to sign the penalties against China?
Well, if Trump doesn't sign legislation that just passed in Congress with a strong bipartisan majority, he's really signaling that his number one priority is getting the Chinese to buy more U.S. goods. It's really signaling that everything has a price for the president. He's willing to stay silent on human rights abuses. He's willing to stay silent on China violating the rule of law, just as long as China agrees to buy more U.S. goods. That could lead other leaders to try to buy Trump's silence as well, as we abandon core American values like the rule of law and human rights.
Sam Vinograd, good to see you. Thank you.
It's hard to believe, right? I mean, we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We spend close to $4 trillion a year on healthcare, and our life expectancy is going down. I mean, you said it hasn't happened in 100 years. You know what was happening 100 years ago? We were in the middle of a world war and a global flu pandemic at the same time. So that just gives you some context. Top three causes of new spiking causes of death: drug overdoses, which we talk a lot about. Suicides have gone up 30%. Wow. 30%. I mean, there's an existential stress going on here, and liver cirrhosis due to alcoholism. Wow. So these are all, they're called the deaths of despair, and it's, something that's predominantly happening in this country.
And again, I just can't say this enough. It's all the other news that goes on in the world. When you see the headline that life expectancy in the U.S. is going down, that should concern you before you see anything else. Is there something unique about the United States?
Well, it's worth pointing out that if you look at the developed world, we're the only country where this is happening. So you could say, well, this must be an economic story. It's not. A labor force story. It's not. Lifestyle, like obesity and diabetes. Other countries have those problems as well. When you look at this problem more specifically, it's really predominantly the white working class in the United States where mortality has continued to go up.
No justice! No peace! Our choice!
It's not our place as humans to extinguish that life.
Few debates get as heated as the debate over abortion.
Now you're in my womb. I want you out.
It's an issue that's very personal on both sides, and a lot of the controversy centers on one key question: when does life begin?
I think it's very hard to know what that means. When life begins, is it when a cell separates? Is it when the soul stirs?
You'd think that in the 21st century, science would be able to assist. But the more we've discovered, the more complicated the issue of personhood seems to have become. For centuries, up until about the mid-1800s, the Catholic Church believed that life began around quickening, when a woman first felt movement in her womb. That happens around the 5th month of pregnancy, around 20 weeks. Nowadays, many people argue that life begins much earlier.
We are living human beings at the moment of conception.
Conception. That's when the sperm enters the egg and forms what's called a zygote. A zygote has all the DNA it needs to become a baby, and its cells soon start dividing. So, is that proof of life, that it's growing?
The Life Act is very simple, but also very powerful. A declaration that all life has value, that all life matters, and that all life is worthy of protection.
Supporters of so-called heartbeat bills have pushed for abortion to be illegal once a heartbeat can be detected. At that point, the embryo is around 6 weeks and about the size of a pea. It's missing vital organs, and the brain is forming but not fully functioning. So is this a human being with a right to life? The highest courts have been tasked with answering that question time and again.
The court's decision in Planned Parenthood versus Casey reaffirmed the core holding of Roe.
Roe v. Wade protects a woman's constitutional right to have an abortion until her fetus can live outside the womb. But even that benchmark of life is debatable. When that case was decided in the 1970s, few babies delivered before 28 weeks survived. Today, preemies born at even 22 weeks are living with the help of intensive care. Ultimately, the question of when life begins may not be decided by science, but by the courts.